welcome you tonight, so we can get moving along. Welcome to A.T. Johnson Museum. Tonight's lecture series, we're working in partnership with the Westmoreland County. I'm with the Westmoreland County Museum. I'm Rosemary Mahan, and we work in partnership with the A.T. Johnson Museum to put on some lectures, and we'll be putting on more throughout the summer. So please stay tuned and keep in touch with what's going on our Facebook page and our websites and throughout the community. Tonight, we are so blessed to have Barbara VornDick. I'll get her name straight up, sorry. She is a docent at the Highland Home of James Monroe in Charlottesville, right? Yeah, near Charlottesville, next to Monticello, if you go up that mountain. If you go up for one, you should go, make sure you go to the second. And so she's going to tell you a little bit about how she did some research, what she learned, and some very exciting things about Eliza Monroe, the daughter of James Monroe, one of the true daughters of the American Revolution. So as you see, we've got DAR also here tonight supporting her speech tonight. So welcome, Barbara, and
Barbara was born and raised in Virginia. She holds a master's degree in education and worked for 3 decades in private and public schools in Virginia, as well as Dramatic Community College as an adjunct professor. And that's where I met Barbara. She was my teacher for early childhood education, and she dreaded me in her class. I would ask for every one I had wrong, I would stay to convince her that my answer was right. She hated seeing me come to class. After she retired to the Charlottesville area, because of me, she started working part-time as an interpreter of history at James Monroe Hay, the Monroe family plantation in Albemarle County, Virginia. After initial training for the position, Barbara was encouraged to continue her own independent research, and she became interested in the Monroe women, particularly Eliza. What started as a project to find out more information about Eliza turned into 5 years of digging through primary sources on both sides of the Atlantic to discover the truth about Eliza's life and the tragic circumstances of her death. I really don't know how I got dragged into this, because we were just friends at the time, and then I became partners with her, and we would text each other constantly about this project. Constantly. Barbara's groundbreaking research turned up newly discovered documents that changed the standard history narrative of this American daughter and led to a campaign to repatriate Eliza's remains from Paris to represent the living descendants of Eliza Monroe, and has been actively planning and facilitating the repatriation process since August 2023. Her biography of Eliza Monroe was published with Barnes & Noble Press in July 2024. And I just want to say that I am in awe of how many people came up to us and said, "I'm so happy you're here." I mean, we're even more happy that you're happy. We've done a few of these kind of lectures, and we've never had someone so interested in the project. You know, they are, but you know, it's not that many. So excited that you're here, and we'll let Barbara come up and do her thing. Thank you.
Maureen's also my editor. I don't think she told you that. She's my book editor, and also she is the financial manager for the repatriation campaign, so thank you. And I want to introduce, you're going to hear from Kathryn Willis in a little bit. This is Kathryn, and she is also part of the fundraising team to bring Eliza Eliza's remains home, and she has quite a fascinating story and background too, because she went to Paris and cleaned Eliza's grave so that the cemetery would not dig up her remains and sell a plot. So she sort of single-handedly saved Eliza. So anyway, we'll get to that in a little bit. I'm going to take this. Take that out here. Very carefully. Just pull it out. I'm trying. Yeah, I'm afraid to do it. Yeah. Afraid I would honk myself right now. Okay. Everyone can hear all right? Thank you so much for inviting us to speak this evening. This is such beautiful country, and my family and I have enjoyed Westmoreland State Park for years. Camping, also the cabins there, and of course finding shark teeth, so very popular in our family. So anyway, it's wonderful to be here. Appreciate it. Well, it worked in the test, didn't it? Maybe I'm too far from the... Okay. Plan B, I don't know why I tested it and it worked when I got here. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it did it.
Yeah, just come a little closer.
So it worked for you. Okay, I'm not supposed to get too far this way either. I
No,
have been
you're
told.
good, you're good, you're good,
So,
you're good.
okay. But now am I in anybody's
You're
way
good,
for
you're
the
good.
presentation?
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So do I have to aim it? I guess. All right, try it again. Point it at the, up here. Okay, okay, so I'm gonna stand this way then. All right. Sorry about that. We're going to talk a little bit this evening about Eliza Monroe, James Monroe's firstborn. She was born in King George County, Westmoreland, but as you know, James Monroe was born right here in Westmoreland. And then we're going to talk about how the documents changed history, and you touched on that already, which I appreciate. And then talk about the next chapter, which is bringing her remains home. I might just have to. Maybe it just takes a while. I don't know. Has to go to a satellite and back or something. I don't know. So Eliza was the firstborn of James and his wife Elizabeth. Monroe's mother's name was Elizabeth. His sister was Elizabeth. He married an Elizabeth, and then Eliza was born as Elizabeth Kortright Monroe. So this is just my silly, assumption that perhaps somebody had to go by Eliza just to keep things straight. So throughout history, she's known as Eliza. If I refer to the mother, I use Elizabeth. If I use Eliza, I'm talking about Monroe's daughter, Eliza. I think, yeah, maybe I could just put the computer up here, and then I can just click it by hand. I apologize. We did a test run. This goes, yeah. Thank you. Is it precarious? Well, I won't go that way then. All right, so the arrows, this is a different computer. Here we go. Now we got it. All right. So these are some of the places Eliza lived. As you can see, she was a Virginia woman. The Fredericksburg is where she lived for the first few years of her life while James Monroe was practicing law in that city. And then in Charlottesville at Highland, which is where I work. Anyone been to Highland in Albemarle County? Yay! All right, very good. She also lived in Enrico County, as we'll see in a moment, after she got married. I'm sorry? Enrico. Okay. All right. the tourist, right? She also was in Washington, D.C., lived in the White House with the Monroes during their 2 terms as president, his 2 terms as president. In Loudoun County, she also lived there for a few years after her parents retired, and that is at Oak Hill, the plantation there, which has been in the news lately, because it looks like we're going to be able to get that as a state park. I see people nodding, so we're really excited about that. It's been in private ownership since it was sold out of the Monroe family, so really, really nice to be able to get that back. There's still Monroe things in there, so I can't wait to get in there. She lived for a time in New York City, and that was after she had become a widow, and she was living with her sister and her husband there in New York for a time. And then also for a little while in Baltimore, and that's where her daughter lived. She married Lloyd Nicholas Rogers, who had an estate called Druid Hill in Baltimore. So Eliza, after she was widowed, she lived there for a time as well. I did want to encourage you to ask questions too as we go. I forgot to say that. So I like to have discussion if you want, or comments too. Eliza was very well educated. She traveled to Europe a couple of times when she was very young, just 7 years old. That was her first trip, because James Monroe always kept his family together. So wherever he went, when he was minister to Spain, France, Great Britain, they were with him, and the family was with him when he was our governor in Richmond. They were with him in the White House. He always kept them together. So as a young child, Eliza experienced some of the cities of Europe. And she attended a boarding school in Paris that we'll talk about in just a moment. The second trip was 1803 to 1807, and that's when President Jefferson sent Monroe to negotiate with Napoleon to get the French out of the port of New Orleans. And again, Eliza was enrolled in the same boarding school. So you can see how much of her education was overseas in Paris. She was also educated in Virginia, and sometimes at home by her father. He taught her some subjects, which is very interesting. During the years they were in Paris, Monroe was educated at Madame Campan's boarding school, and that was a very prestigious boarding school. The sister of Napoleon attended there, Caroline Bonaparte. So she was getting a very good education. She was also getting to meet some of the families of the children of the royal families in Europe. However, we don't want to assume that it was a hoity-toity kind of school, because I wanted to find out about that. So I did some research about this school, and it was very interesting. It turns out that Madame Campan had been lady-in-waiting to Marie Antoinette, and we know what happened to Marie Antoinette. In fact, Madame Campan helped Marie Antoinette wrap her jewels to smuggle them out of the country before she was guillotined. So part of Madame Campan's curriculum included teaching these young women how to get along if they lost everything. So she required them to know how to wash their clothes, take care of their clothes. Their dresser drawers were open for inspection at all times, and they were required to make meals and carry them personally to the poor. And that was a couple times a week. So she worked those things into the curriculum to keep these girls grounded. And at one point, Eliza told her father, "Don't worry, I will return to America as good a Republican as ever." Just wanted to be sure that nobody thought she was getting heirs while she was over there. This was her best friend really throughout her life. While at the school, she met Hortense de Beauharnais. They were just children at the time. You can see the little portrait on the left. That is the very portrait that she gave Eliza while at the school. They didn't have class pictures, you know, to swap when you get your school photos. So this is a hand-painted watercolor on ivory that she gave Eliza, but they ended up good friends throughout their lives. Turns out this little girl in Europe, her father had been guillotined during the French Revolution, and her mother was named Josephine. So her mom Napoleon. So now, Monroe's daughter Eliza is dear friends with Napoleon's stepdaughter. When the family returned from the second trip to Europe, when Monroe was minister to various countries, they were met with a lot of pomp and circumstance, great receptions, and I think at this time in her life, Eliza really became very aware of her father's standing in the country. She was about 20 years old. Folks who saw her mentioned, wrote in letters and things, how she had improved in grace and manner and things like that. So now she's a young woman coming back to America after her education had been completed. And her father, of course, is being met with all of this big hoopla. About a year later, after they returned, Eliza married the, in my opinion, very dashing George Hay. He was a district attorney for Virginia, very prominent district attorney. He prosecuted Aaron Burr for treason. And then a year later, their daughter was born. Note the name, Hortensia. So the daughter was named Hortensia Eugenia, after her friend Hortense and his brother Eugene. And Eliza asked them to be godparents, and they consented. So they were godparents to Monroe's little granddaughter, Hortensia. Now for the next 8 years after Eliza got married, she's mistress of the plantation, and her daughter's growing up. The plantation was called Ashfield. It was a gift from her parents to the newly married couple. And I mention this background of Eliza because certainly she had learned the social graces, there's no doubt about that. But by the time Monroe became president in 1817, Eliza did not have the experience in the political realm that her mother had. By that time, when Monroe became president, he had been ambassador to 3 countries on 2 different trips. He had been a senator from Virginia. He had been our governor 4 times. He was Secretary of State and Secretary of War during the presidency of Madison. And then he became president. So her mother had been the wife of a man in all those positions. So she had that experience. But unfortunately, the mother's health had been steadily declining. So by the time Monroe became president, she was not up to that rigorous social agenda that Dolly Madison, for example, had kept in the White House. Open house, come in, she was a real social butterfly. Elizabeth Monroe, not so much. So Eliza moved her family into the White House so that she could assist her mother. And this is where I found the bad press starting about Eliza. People said she was bossy. John Quincy Adams said she was a little firebrand. I think that perhaps she may have been a little brusque. She may have not had the experience of her mother in dealing with diplomats and things, but she got the job done, and I think you'll see that as we go along, and that seems to be one of her very special traits that she had. The Monroes changed the etiquette, the protocols of the White House as soon as they got there. And that was, I believe, for a couple of reasons. My research indicates that it was a concerted effort between James and his wife and Eliza to try to figure out a formal protocol where the mother would not be called upon to, for example, leave the White House and pay the first call to visiting diplomatic wives, wives of the diplomats. Dolly Madison had always done that. She would just rush right out and meet them and greet them and all of that. The Monroes were not going to do that. They also changed the protocols so that Mrs. Monroe was not obligated to return a visit. if someone came to see her. So if one of the wives of a congressman came to visit her at the White House, she was not obliged to return that visit. There were these kinds of changes put in place. This ended up being discussed in 2 cabinet meetings, actually. It became such a hullabaloo about it. But I do think that it was to protect her health for a couple of reasons. One, Mrs. Monroe had very serious arthritis. And in those days, it doesn't seem like they distinguished between rheumatism and osteoarthritis and that kind of thing. But, you know, it was to the point where she was bedridden at times. And then we know now in hindsight that she had the falling sickness. She had epilepsy. So I think the evidence strongly suggests that these protocols were changed for a couple of reasons. One, to return the White House to a more formal protocol than it had had during the Madison years, and also to keep Mrs. Monroe from overexerting herself and falling very ill, and also to keep her conditions from prying eyes. You know, you wouldn't want anyone to see an epileptic seizure, particularly at that time. Washington society didn't like this so much. They were really, the press just hammered both Eliza and her mother. Eliza was officiating at many functions with her father instead of her mother. It's my opinion, some folks might have felt snubbed by that. I don't think people understood exactly what was going on and the reason behind the more formal protocols. The press dubbed her mother Queen Elizabeth, you know, implying she didn't want to mix with the little people, you know, that kind of thing. The press really was very unkind. They just kind of went wild with this. Things got even worse when Eliza planned her sister's wedding. There was 15 years difference between the 2 girls. So Eliza was the oldest. Then James Monroe had a son who sadly died of whooping cough at 16 months old. And then Mariah was born, so 15 years younger. Mariah was still in school in Philadelphia at Madame Rolad's, another French education, but this time in America, for the first 2 years of Monroe's presidency. So she didn't get to the White House till 1819. By that time, you've got the older sister. She's running things for 2 years now, right? And the little sister comes in. Well, she decides she wants to marry one of James Monroe's secretaries, Samuel Gouverneur. And Eliza was planning the wedding because her mother was not up to that at this point. So Mrs. Monroe's health was just steadily declining over the years. Well, a lot of people didn't take kindly to that. Eliza planned a very small, intimate ceremony, limited it to about 40 family and friends, close friends only, and that was going to be it. Well, for some reason, the elite society in Washington thought they were entitled to attend the White House wedding, and they were all upset that they weren't. So finally, a compromise was reached. Did I push the wrong button? There we go. So Eliza, meanwhile, she's catching the brunt of all this criticism, right? Even her new brother-in-law-to-be was upset. You know, it seems like he wanted to be with him. The Washington politicians, they all wanted to come. So the compromise was that the ceremony would be small, and there would be 3 big receptions, big balls held around Washington. And then everybody seemed okay with that. They're like, okay, so they're going to get their moment, you know, with the presidential family to celebrate this wedding. But that didn't go as planned either. Poor Eliza. I'm like, wow, I can't get a break. So the first reception was held, and there was evidently an altercation at that reception between Commodore Decatur and Commodore Barron. And the next morning they dueled, and Decatur was killed. He was a really well-known national hero at that time, and so Washington was just reeling from that. And the second and third receptions were canceled. So once again, Washington elites, they're not happy. So, all in all, from what I found, during the White House years, it seems people made a lot of assumptions. For example, the Monroes were the first presidential family back into the White House after it had been burned in the War of 1812. In fact, when they got into the White House in 1817, they were using their own furniture because they had to get allocation of funds from the Congress, before they could even buy something. So it took Mrs. Monroe at least 6 months, or more like a year, just to get the place so there are chairs for entertaining. And I don't think the people in Washington seemed to understand that. They had been used to open access, to the first family, and I don't think they quite understood what was going on there. The first big reception, if you will, held by the Monroes was not until New Year's, after they had gotten into the White House. So that was almost a year when finally people got in there. The protocols had been changed. Eliza was officiating instead of the mother, and the wedding plans just made everybody upset. So personally, I give Eliza credit for, she just keeps on keeping on. She's, all of this bad press and everything, and she's just, I'm doing the best I can, and I'm not going to put my mother in that position, and she can't, so I give her a lot of credit for that. We'll talk more about that in a minute. The unfavorable reputation, though, stuck to Eliza. And the standard historical narrative, and when I say that, I'm talking about the few little handful of sentences that were written in the Monroe biographies. Eliza just has a few mentions in the Monroe biographies, and I get it. Monroe was the subject of the biography. The biography was about him. The children were peripheral to this story, but if you're going to say something about somebody, it should be accurate. And here are some of the quotes about her that you can see how this narrative about her just kept growing. It was like the telephone game. I tell you something and you pass it down, and by the time it gets back there, it's like, So, I'm not even going to say the last one with Jack Mitchell. I don't know what he was thinking. He just sort of really blew up that narrative about her. But this is what got repeated. And it's one of the things that got me interested in learning more about Eliza, because the sentences were so much the same. Whether you read them in the Ammon biography or the McGrath or the Unger, it's always these same couple of sentences, and except for a few words, they're basically the same. So it's like everybody had just taken this and just passed it on and passed it on. And so that made me a little suspicious too. So I wanted to find out more about her and see if all that was true. It boils down to this: the narrative that Eliza was haughty, obstinate, had an argument with family, and abandoned her family and country to live out her life and die in Paris. That's what hooked me, because when she left for Paris on her last trip, she was a grandmother. It was 1838, and I'm a grandmother. And there is no way, I don't care who I argue with, I don't care how much you pay me, I am not getting in a ship and sailing across the ocean to live out my life and die there. That just made no sense to me at all. And so that's when that just hooked me. I wanted to find out more about that. And by the way, none of that is true. Well, we'll get to that. Any questions so far? Before we go?
Did she remain married? She was married at this time?
She, by 1838, her husband had died, and I'm going to talk about that too. Yes. So when she left for Europe, she had already been a widow for 7 years by that point. Mm-hmm. So the evidence, here's what the evidence says, and I do want to tell you that I did look for any, any actions that she ever did that would show that she was obstinate, that would show that she was haughty. I could not find one example. So, for example, John Quincy Adams said she's an obstinate little firebrand. Well, why? He didn't say what she did. I couldn't find anything to back it up. One historian asked me when I was talking with her about it, she said, well, did she get mad and throw a chair or something? And I said, no, not that I know of. So what I'm giving you is, I want you to know this is not just bias here. I honestly look, as Maureen said, this was a 5-year project here. I looked for examples. It was my duty, you know, if I'm going to tell about her life story, I need to know about it. All of those things, and I couldn't find them. Honestly, I couldn't find one. She had an extraordinary devotion to family. Her nursing of the sick was known all over Virginia, Maryland. She was being called to people's houses to help take care of their children. During the last few years of her life, she demonstrated terrific strength and fortitude, and I will give you quick examples of these, and also her sense of duty. So let's talk a little bit about nursing the sick. She nursed the victims of 2 epidemics in Washington during her father's presidency. Now, you know, if you think you're all that, you're not going to get with people, you're not going to take care of, one of those epidemics was malaria. So, you know, she was right in there with that. She was always being called to relatives, friends, neighbors' houses. She nursed her mother through the last 13 years of her life and was there for her daughter during childbirth and taking care of her grandchildren. And her father died after just 9.5 months after her mother. And for those months, Eliza, now a widow, was in New York with him and her sister and her sister's husband. And Eliza took care of him those last 10 months as he died of tuberculosis. One of the big examples, or main examples I'd like to talk about, is that at one point during Monroe's presidency, his Secretary of War, John Calhoun, he and his wife had sadly lost one of their young children, had died, and then a second one of the children got sick. So Eliza went right away to the house. This was during the time she was planning Eliza's wedding. So Mrs. Calhoun said, oh no, you're doing so much at the White House, you're doing the wedding and everything. I don't feel like you have to come, it'll be okay. And James Monroe himself said, let her take care of the child. She is the best nurse you could have. And Eliza went and sat up with that child that night, multiple times. And also, there's an editor, a woman who was the wife of the editor of one of the publications in Washington at the time, Margaret Bayard Smith. She wrote about this incident with the Calhouns, that Eliza came and sat all evening by the child and reluctantly left it, but told Mrs. C she should come the next evening and would take no denial. She also saved her mother's life. And this is the last nursing example I'll give you, unless you want to use it. This one is very poignant, and I think it really speaks to some extraordinary skills that Eliza had. After Monroe had served 2 terms in the White House, he retired in 1825, and the Monroes moved to Oak Hill. And one morning at Oak Hill, I should back up, Eliza moved there, I think I mentioned, with her family, so that she could keep taking care of her mother. So one morning the family sat down to breakfast, and after breakfast, James Monroe got in a carriage to ride off. He was still dabbling in politics a little bit there those first couple of years. So he's left the house, and a while later, one of the enslaved workers came to Eliza and said that he had heard a ruckus in one of the rooms upstairs, and he was afraid it was his mistress. He was afraid it was Mrs. Monroe. So Eliza flew up the stairs to her mother, and she found her mother unconscious and convulsing in a burning fireplace. She had also been stabbed by an andiron out the way down in her torso. She was burned over 1/3 of her body. And Eliza saved her. She survived. So she got her out of the fire. Whatever she did, I don't know. That wasn't in the letter. These are the words of James Monroe, I'm telling you now. when he wrote about what happened to a family member. She was unconscious for 10 days, and whatever Eliza was using to help keep an infection at bay and all of that, I don't know. But it would be good to know, because even today, if you're burned over a third of your body, that's significant. You're in big trouble. Now, the only thing Monroe did mention in the letter, that during those first 10 days, they were giving Mrs. Monroe 250 drops of laudanum a day. So, now sometimes they'll do a medically induced coma or something, to keep you out of pain. So that may have been, that's, for those who don't know, that is opium and mix it with a little brandy or something. So, 250 drops is, from what I could tell, the standard dose at the time might have been as high as 15 a day. So, but she
But
may.
you were still conscious at 15.
Excuse me?
You would still be conscious at 15 drops.
Probably, I don't know, but probably not at 250. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. But Mrs. Monroe did recover actually well enough that a couple years after that, she was able to travel to New York and visit with Mariah and the grandchildren. So, quite remarkable. Her strength and fortitude was demonstrated on many occasions. I just got a couple for you. Eliza's husband died September 21st, 1830. Her mother died 2 days later, September 23rd, 1830. And her father died 9.5 months after that, on the 4th of July, 1831. So that's when, as I mentioned at the beginning, why she was living in New York, after they buried her mother at Oak Hill, then Eliza, now a widow, traveled with her father and her younger sister and her husband to live in New York with them, and then that's when Eliza nursed Monroe for the next 10 months, and then he died in New York. And also, just 3 years later, her only surviving child, she had lost one baby, her daughter Hortensia died of tuberculosis also. And my research indicates that Eliza was there during that time and took care of her. And I won't get into the documents, but I have her returning to the port. She came in to New York just after the birth of Hortensia's third child in July, and then by December, Hortensia was dead. So I believe Eliza stayed there to take care of then the other children, the rest of the grandchildren, for 4 years. The evidence I found suggests that she lived at Druid Hill, taking care of Hortensia's 3 young children who were 4 years old, 2 years old, and a newborn, and also 2 young children who were the children of Hortensia's husband by a previous marriage. So there were 5 children in that household. So, of course, a grandmother would stay. But that's just not my assumption. I do have documents, for example, that 1838 trip, her residence on her passport is listed as Baltimore. And so, there's things like that that show she was living in Baltimore. And she also demonstrated a sense of duty because she carried out her father's deathbed wish to free his manservant Peter Marks. And that took about 1.5 years, but Eliza made sure that happened. And of course, as we've mentioned, she assisted her mother in duties at the White House, and she stayed at Druid Hill, based on my research, for 4 years to take care of the grandchildren. So now we're up to 1838. But before I have to mention sense of humor. I have to. I only found one piece of tidbit about her sense of humor, and it's just too good to pass up. Some of you might not think it's too funny, but it just cracked me up. Anyway, so what happened was, Eliza was officiating with John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State at the time, in the White House for some sort of reception. I don't know the nature of it, but John Quincy Adams' wife was away. So during this soiree, everybody's coming up to John Quincy Adams saying, "Where's Louisa?" That's his wife's name. "Where's Louisa? Is Louisa all right? Can we see Louisa? What's happening with Louisa?" Well, finally, evidently Eliza had enough because she just blurted out, "Oh, this is so tedious, these questions. Just last winter in the drawing room, when Mr. Hay was away, 150 people, I'm quoting now, 150 people came up to me asking, 'Where's Mr. Hay? How's Mr. Hay? Is Mr. Hay all right?' So finally I said, 'He's dead!' He's dead and buried, I tell you. And it's so distressing. I'll thank you to say no more about it. I've just got the news." And then she just broke out. It's just, ha. She broke out. I was picturing these people in their fine attire, and it's a sedate thing in the White House. I pictured these faces like, what did she do? Anyway, her husband was quite fine. He was just away on business, as he was as a district attorney from time to time. This is the best, I think, to me, the best description of Eliza, and it also could be about many of us, I think, and this is from John Quincy Adams' wife, Louisa. "This woman is made up of so many great and little qualities, is so full of agreeables and disagreeables, so accomplished and so ill-bred, has so much sense, so little judgment. She's so proud and so mean. I scarcely ever met such a compound." Again, no examples here, like, what did she do that was disagreeable? I don't know. I just thought it was funny. All of this led me to the conclusion that perhaps Eliza was a woman ahead of her time. So she marched into that White House by all accounts and just took charge. She's officiating in place of her mother. She's taking care of her mother and then doing the social activities. She's raising her daughter in the White House. Little Hortensia grew up in the White House, basically. She's also planning her sister's wedding, and to me, in those days, that could have been interpreted as, oh, she's so bossy, or she's trying to run the place, or I could see that happening. And I think that she had qualities we would admire today. And these are just a couple of scholars who have looked into, the expectations of behavior for women during this time period. And they agree that, particularly the bottom one, Lydia Heaton, that in the 1800s, any woman with strong opinions who dared to speak them would likely be considered bossy or overbearing. And if you think back about Eliza's education, she's so well educated. She was fluent in French, reading, writing, speaking. All the Monroes were. She's been to European cities. I don't. And then the example, about her outburst, at that function at the White House. It seems to me she did not tolerate idle conversation very well. This is my conclusion about Eliza. Now, in 1838, she was advised to take a sea voyage for her health. I don't know what the ailment was, but considering her exposure to tuberculosis, that wouldn't surprise me if it was that. And she set up a residence in an apartment. It may have been a couple of rooms. I've seen the Paris records for that building that she was in at 62 Champs-Élysées. Now, while there, she's waiting for her inheritance. So she's struggling to make ends meet. It had been 7 years since her father died. In his very extraordinarily short will of 5 sentences, his property was to be divided between the 2 girls, right? Mariah and Eliza. She had not gotten a cent, not 1 cent, and that's from her letter, or her last letters of her life there in Paris. I was privileged to hold those in my hand. Very moving because she's frantic. She's asking for rooms to stay in. I mean, she's talking about the price of fuel so high and the cost of rent. So she was really struggling during this times, and she began writing letters to some pretty important people. She wrote to King Louis Philippe, France, asking him for some rooms to stay in, and also a staff member of Tsar Nicholas I. So the only letter we have to go on is the draft that she wrote, for Tsar Nicholas I, and it had to go through a staff member of his. And I do believe Eliza felt that she had connections to these people. I don't think this was so grandiose. I don't think it was, unrealistic for her to think that they could help her. And I won't get into all that, but there is evidence of connection to these people from her times when she was in Europe. So I think she felt like she could ask them, and if she's not getting her inheritance from home, from America, she hired lawyers to get it. And she still hadn't gotten it. She's waiting for it in France. She was desperate, and she's desperate to write to these people. Here's a little bit from her letter to Louis Philippe. If your majesty can aid me at the present moment, it may save me from utter ruin. Living in Paris is very dear. House rent and fuel is enormous. And this is from her last letter that we have. Much of human life, my friend, is spent in lamentation and in inaction. But that's not my character. I will do all I can to sustain myself. And if I fail, I can only feel that I have done my best. It gets me every time. I held that letter in my hands. In 3 months, she was dead. And in debt. So she died on December 27th, 1840. This is an etching of a real daguerreotype that was taken of a funeral procession at Pere Lachaise Cemetery in 1840. It's not Eliza's though, because it's way too grand. Here's what happened with her when she died. Her name came across the desk of a consul at the American Embassy named Daniel Brent, born in Stafford. And he worked in the State Department during 3 presidential administrations, including Monroe. I've seen the letters between the two men. So now he's at the embassy in Paris, and at that time, they might still do it, I don't know, but at that time, the embassy was informed of Americans who died in Paris. And I looked through a lot of those records. It was staggering how many. But the embassy was trying to help out with that as best they could. So he got Eliza's name, and he knew who that was. He must have been shocked. So he made all the arranged for a funeral mass for her at St. Philippe de Roule Catholic Church in Paris, which was most likely her parish, because that church was only 300 meters from her address at 62 Champs-Élysées. My research was able to uncover, by the help of the archivist at St. Philippe de Roule, the only documentation ever found that Eliza did convert to Catholicism near the end of her life. So Daniel Brent arranged a Catholic burial and the Mass for her. And so now we have that documentation. It had kind of been legend before. You'll see it in some of the Monroe biographies. But they even say she became a nun and died in a convent. I'm like, no. that legend about Eliza just was growing and growing. But she did not become a nun. She did not die in a convent. She died in her room at 62 Champs-Élysées. But the most important thing that, as far as leading to the repatriation campaign that Daniel Brent did, was the inventory of her effects at the time of her death. And I'm going to get to that in a second. I think, I pulled this sentence for you because, from one of Daniel Brent's letters, because it shows that he clearly knew who she was. He was, I think, wished he could have done better, arranged a more suitable ceremony for her. But a funeral ceremonial of the utmost simplicity, so it was decent, but by no means corresponded with her station. It was very sweet, his letter back to the States, to Secretary of State at that time, John Forsyth. But he made an inventory of her effects, and this is kind of crazy, but this is one of the crazy things that's happened during this adventure of, I had never done this kind of historical research before, I gotta tell you. And I didn't set out to write a book, it just ended up, all this, it was like a detective story, and I just got going with it. And it just turned out that way. But remember that legend about her said she had abandoned her family with the intention of living out her life and dying in Paris. And I told you that didn't make sense to me. And this inventory was found in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., filed under the wrong century. So an archivist there named Amy got interested in the story, because I had told her a little bit about it. I said, there's got to be some documents from the embassy. And so she dug for those, and I got an email with these really convoluted directions of how to get to these files from the 1600s that have the 1800s documents in them. But anyway, we got them, and they hadn't been seen in 200 years. That's amazing. But the inventory of her effects was key because all she had were 2 traveling trunks. She was renting. She had not set up a residence. She had never bought a house. She didn't have one household furnishing in her possessions. She didn't even have a candle holder to her name. She just had what you and I travel with. She had a couple of trunks in those days, not rolling carts, suitcases. But she had dresses, and she had a couple hair pieces, and some jewelry, she had some papers, things like that. But this, to me, indicates she didn't intend to stay there. I think if she had gotten her inheritance and hadn't, been so ill, and hadn't had money to come back, I believe she would have. And then, the thought came to me, well, we should bring her back then. She's been in Pere Lachaise Cemetery in an unmarked grave for over 200 years. And the family had kind of written her off, actually, her descendants. When I talked with them, the story they had grown up learning was that, yeah, she left everybody she wanted to do there. In fact, one of the descendants said, and she got her own grave at Pere Lachaise before she died. She purchased that, and I'm like, no, here's what happened. And then he's like, wow, yeah, we didn't know that. So isn't it interesting how did that start? How did that legend start? Really interesting. So that led to the campaign to repatriate her remains. There is another story to this, and that was a large part of those 5 years of research, and that is, how did she become penniless? So I told you that she didn't get her inheritance like she should have. The lawyers didn't get it for her either, and that seems odd. But she spelled it out in those last letters that I held in my hands. She said exactly what happened and who did it. But due diligence required. I would not sully a man's reputation, whether he's dead or alive, and without being able to prove it. So, not that I didn't believe her letters, but I wanted to prove it. So I followed about 50 years of that man's life to verify what she had written. And yep. And now that's all new. There are never before seen documents, both from the consulate and also these documents about what this man was doing with the money from Monroe estate. Pardon?
Was he a lawyer?
It was the executor of Monroe's will. Should I say more? It was her brother-in-law. It was her sister's husband, Samuel Gouverner. There's one other possibility, and I have to mention it because there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest it, but I don't have absolute proof. She may have been shunned because of her conversion and cut off from her inheritance. There's some documents to indicate that. I found some other documents pertaining to her conversion and when that likely happened, and somebody who had written to Eliza and pledged her secrecy, you know, that kind of thing. So it's possible that the family found out about that and then just didn't send it. I don't know. But I just think it's worth mentioning just as a possibility, but I cannot prove that. And this is the document that was found at the church. It's all in French, so I have the translation in my notes, but Kathryn can probably read it, but the handwriting is difficult to read. This is St. Philippe the Rule. Picture was taken by the archivist for me, and this is the same structure. You know, in Europe, they got old buildings. This is the same, very same as it was when Eliza was buried from this church. So now we're going to talk about, unless there are any questions up to this point, we're going to talk about the repatriation. Yes?
Did her children ever inherit any of the money? Or did her brother-in-law take it?
That's one reason I followed this. She died in 1840. I followed this into the 1900s with court documents to see if any of them had gotten any. The only thing I found, and it was not done in a probate court, so most of the inheritance things are done in either probate, orphans court in Washington, and so it wasn't in one of those courts, but Eliza's, the executor of Eliza's will, Richard Smith, so she had a will that was with her possessions too, so I have her will. Her executor was present when Samuel Gouverner, okay, her brother-in-law, gave a check for $799 to the two surviving granddaughters of Eliza. So by the time that was done, the date on that was late. I mean, it was like 20 years after Eliza had died. The girls were grown. One was dead already, unfortunately, so there were only two of the grandchildren alive, and together they got $799. From Monroe's estate of Oak Hill, that was 3,000 acres, and the sale of his papers, and his autobiography, and, you know, I tried to like quickly calculate that, and we're talking millions that she would have split with her sister. So about 20 years after Eliza's death, two of the girls got $799 to split, and then I don't even know if that was considered inheritance or not. The only thing that suggests it is that the executor of Eliza's will was present. Yeah, otherwise.
Just out of interest, John Hay was James Lincoln's secretary and Abraham Lincoln. Was there any relationship between her husband and John Hay?
You know, you're the second person at an event that has asked that question. I only tracked George Hay to his son. He had a son, Charles, and he had a daughter, then he had Hortensia, of course, but he had two children from a previous marriage. So it would have been a descendant of Charles Hay, and I don't know, but that's quite possible. That's quite possible, because they were all in positions, you know, to be doing that kind of thing and well educated. Does anybody else know the answer to that? You gave me homework now. I'm gonna go find that out. Any other questions here? Yeah.
What did Eliza die
I don't know. I'm assuming, you know, she had taken the trip, 1838. She was there about a year and a half and then died 1840. So I don't know if, I'm assuming it was a lung ailment of some sort, but I just don't know for sure. I suspect it was TB, since she had had so much exposure to it during her life. And then if she's destitute, you know, she's not able to eat well. I don't know if she could keep warm, you know, that kind of thing going on, and that might, you know, hasten things along. I don't know. Kathryn, come on down. Any of you know Kathryn from, she is Mrs. Fundraiser in Fredericksburg, I'll tell you what, and she was very active in the Lafayette, all that Lafayette year, you know, of all those events and everything happening around the state. Kathryn was in there with all of that. These are some of the reasons for bringing, in my opinion, for bringing Eliza's remains home. She was an American citizen, and it's what we do. If we find out if one of our own has died over there, through no fault of their own, it was stuck. She served her country as First Lady. She worked tirelessly to nurse the sick, and the documents indicated that she died in bed and likely would have come home. So, you know, let's bring her. And I'm gonna let you talk about it.
When the grave was found, and they then put a marker on it, you said it was.
Kathryn had a marker made and put on it, and I'm gonna let her talk. So, but they wouldn't let us attach it. They wouldn't let her attach it because she didn't own the grave. That's the whole thing. So it sits on it. It sits on it. So, we were introduced by Eliza, right? So, before COVID, I was working with the James Monroe Museum on programming that reflected the friendship between James Monroe and Lafayette. And I'm sitting there with Scott Harris, who's the director of the museums at Mary Washington, and he looked at me and he said, "You speak French?" He said, "You can help me with this letter." So he brings out this letter. It is so officious. It is the most condescending, formal French I have come across in a while. But that's his bureaucratic style that we've been dealing with. I think they must go to school to perfect it. But anyway, I read the letter, and it was addressed to James Monroe Museum in Fredericksburg. And it said, "The grave of Eliza Monroe Hay is failing, and if you do not do something to rehabilitate this grave and bring it up to standards, we are going to exhume her bones, put them in the ossuary, and reseal the grave." Wow. So we think, well, how can we take care of the grave? So we consult the Attorney General of Virginia, thinking that maybe we can buy this grave. And the Attorney General writes back and says, Virginia cannot own any property outside of the state of Virginia, which when you think about it, makes good sense. And he said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to Paris this spring. Let me see what I can do." So I go and I make an appointment with the director after 2 tries where he kind of dismissed me. Anyway, I go with this letter, and it has the, go back to Pere Lachaise, and it has the, it's divided, Pere Lachaise is divided into avenues and streets, and then within the graves that are located on there, they have numerical designations for who is buried in that, in the book. And we cross-referenced the grave that was indicated in the letter with the plot and the death certificate of Eliza Monroe Hay in the archives at Pere Lachaise. And he said, "It's not that grave. That grave is the grave next to Eliza's. It was a wealthy banker's who had had an obelisk erected over his gravesite. The obelisk had fallen forward, broken the stone, and it was this giant crevice of ivy and gunk. Eliza's grave next to it." Well, I'll show you where it is. She had mentioned that Daniel Brent was the
consul for the Americans in Paris. Daniel Brent, this was not unusual. There were a lot of Americans doing business in Paris. There were an awful lot of researchers, doctors, and that sort of thing who lived in Paris for professional reasons. And Brent, as consul, had purchased a section of Pere Lachaise, which is, all right. No, that's all right. Take it back.
It's me. I'm the wizard.
Oh, you're doing it. No, take it back to the gravesite. I mean, to the Pere Lachaise. No, the Pere Lachaise itself. Yeah. All right.
All right, I don't know which way to go now. We want to go.
Backwards, I think.
Back to the actual.
Back to the Pere Lachaise. Let me just say, Pere Lachaise was and still is the place to be buried in Paris. It has Lamartine, it has, all these poets and composers and blah, blah, blah. So this gravesite is pretty valuable.
I don't know why I can't get back to that one.
And you go forward. Anyway, let's see if we can find it.
It's not, I don't have it on me, that's why I can't.
Well, no. I meant the cortege of Pere Lachaise and
I don't know why it's not.
Huh.
Maybe if you escape out of the slideshow presentation, you can find a little bit more easily and mark it and bring it back up that way.
Yeah, I don't have that showing here, and I'm not sure on this is not my computer, I'm not sure how to get that. Where I can see them down the left side, and then go right to it.
There you go.
Yeah, so it would be,
It's the daguerreotype.
it's going to be that.
There it is. That's it.
Thank you. This is going to.
So, you see that curvature is the main entrance, and if you go straight up that avenue, that big white building that's in the center is the ossuary. That's where they exhumed bones and put it in. And our sweet Daniel Brent, the man who made it possible for Eliza to be buried, the family of Daniel Brent in Stafford in the 1990s went to Pere Lachaise and said, we would like to bring Daniel Brent home. And they said, nobody took care of the grave, so they had exhumed his bones and put them in the ossuary and they go there. Said, French bureaucracy, it's great. So, anyway, this is still the French section. The American section is way up here on the right. And, no, this is fine. Thank you. But, anyway, so, now we can go forward to the gravesite. So anyway, I've got the identification of the wrong grave that they sent us. I've got the director's photograph of the big, he was perturbed with me, but he did open the book and said, this is the number that corresponds with the death certificate and the burial plot that is on Eliza Monroe Hay's death certificate. So we walk up, and I said, I just want to make sure I've got this straight. And there is Eliza's grave. It's very plain. You see these great mausoleums that are on all sides? These were rich American people who had the mausoleums done in their memories. And poor old Eliza's grave is this marble slab. It's not great marble. It's not finished. You can still see the swirls of the seashells in it. It's pitted. It is a bare minimum of grave. It has footers around the side, as you can see here, and then the grave is someone capped on the top. Not even a number on the side. Nothing. It is marked. When I got there, you see that top one with all that ivy on it? That's what it was. So I made a little poster and I put it in the American bookshops and around town, and it said, Eliza needs your help. She hasn't had a facelift in 160 years. So I got some students, American students there, and they came up and helped me pull this ivy off. And then I went back with the bucket and, scrub brush and all that stuff. Got it clean as best I could, and realized that there was still no marker. And when I asked the fellow, the director of the cemetery, Pere Lachaise, he said, "You can't touch this. You cannot walk this stone anyway." I said, "Can I clean it?" He went, take that as a yes. So it took me about a week. Just as an aside, Pere Lachaise hasn't changed a whole lot since 1840 when she died. The pumps are about every 2 blocks. You take your bucket down, you put your bucket right underneath the spigot, and then you go, and you take it back and you scrub. You pour that water out, you go back. Anyway, it was an experience, but I felt so sorry for this woman that she was ignominiously buried and with not even a marking and no possibility of keeping up the grave because we don't own it. It was at that point that I met Barbara and she said, "We need to bring her home." And we do. This woman was daughter of a president. She served her country with dedication in controversial times. We owe this woman to be reunited with her true family. She adored her parents. In many ways, she gave up a lot of her life to serve her parents and this country. She said yes to that responsibility, and she did it with aplomb. I probably wouldn't like Eliza very much. I agree with Barbara that she probably was a woman ahead of her time. I think both Elizabeth Monroe and James Monroe were very dedicated to their children. It is unusual for parents of that stature to teach their children. James Monroe wanted Eliza to know about math, about science, and about history, not just about how to run a household and how to arrange flowers. They saw to it that she could hold her own and that she could become a citizen of the world. And they invested in her. And I agree with that. Anyway, so not only is my righteous indignation still vivid after 6 or 8 years of this, but we have this passion together to do right by this daughter of the revolution. And that's where we meet. That's where we meet. So, I thought, how are we going to do this? And Barbara said, I don't know, but we're going to try. So, here is where we are. There are only 4 of us. Maureen, Barbara, the Brain Trust, me, the writer, fundraiser, PR person, and Sue Henderson, who is, she's just retired as the director of the Stafford County Historical Society, the museum up there. And she has done a lot of work in PR too. So Sue and I take care of that public face. Maureen keeps us straight with the bookkeeping and the letter writing and who donate what, where, when. Barbara is, of course, the person who continues to uncover research that's relevant to this. and me. That's it. And where we are, we have been doing this to small groups like you guys. And we have gotten support from individuals, from DARs, from SARs, and from groups of patriotic and civic nature. We are in the process of writing a grant with Virginia 250 so that we can qualify for a matching grant, linking Eliza's story as a daughter of the Revolution and as a woman whose reputation needs to be rehabilitated. So, do you want to do this? You want me to? Okay. So, we have been very, very fortunate in having a lot of people say, we will help you. A lot of pro bono work is being donated. The funeral home in Paris has offered to forgive some of the expenses of the exhumation. Saint-Philippe du Roule has been very helpful with the archives and the research there. The Catholic priest will probably be involved in this exhumation. We have a pro bono transportation gift so that once her body is exhumed, and it'll probably be like a cherub casket, right? The transportation has been arranged from the gravesite to Charles de Gaulle with the arrival in Washington. And then we have a funeral home in Fredericksburg, Virginia, Founding Sons, who have taken care of remains of Americans who have died abroad. That is pro bono. Other services, such as, well, let me circle back to Oak Hill. Oak Hill was Monroe's beautiful residence that he built, and he retired there after the presidency. Oak Hill is the property that, with luck, the rest of the funding to have the state accepted as a state park will be forthcoming, we'll see. But the kind people at Oak Hill have given us permission that when Eliza comes home, we are going to be able to bring her remains to Oak Hill and circle around that central courtyard twice, which is a tradition of old, that when the person dies, especially in Virginia, of course, you return that person's remains to the home that is most closely associated with them. There are quite a few expenses that we are not going to have forgiven, as you can imagine, and that's what we're after. We are in the process of writing a matching grant. We have gotten support from DARs and SARs, but we cannot do this by ourselves. We can't. We need the public's help. Thank you for coming here. You are the perfect example of how this passionate story needs to be passed to people who also are vested in the heritage of the American story and who are with us in rehabilitating Eliza. Yes?
So is the French Ladia willing to allow her to escape grants?
I'm going to give that to you.
Are they allowing her dates? Are they going to allow her to leave France?
That's a great question. Yeah, we've been working on that now, almost going on 2 years. Because you'd think it would be simple. Yes, you think. I had no idea like how to do this. I just, wanted to do it, and so I started with my local representative's office, and said, so do I need to tell the State Department? She's the daughter of a president. How can we bring her home? I called Andrews Air Force Base. Can she fly on a military flight. I mean, I didn't know, daughter of the founding father, anyway. So I got in touch with, long story short, Pere Lachaise. The requirements are extraordinarily stringent. So I had to find every living descendant of Eliza Monroe after 8 generations, and they all had to approve it. Paperwork was involved, a lot of paperwork. Certified documents, they wanted their birth certificates, they wanted a complete genealogy from Eliza to the living descendants that had never been done before, so I learned how to do that too. So it's my honor to do this. I don't mean to be flippant about it or anything. It really is an honor to do it, but I had no idea. But here's the thing, well, first of all, just last week, Pere Lachaise approved, and I've been sending them documents for 6 months or whatever. Anyway, they just approved the descendant line of the Eliza descendants. After sending multiple packets and things. For them, I sent about 200 documents to Paris in like 3 shipments. And now, though, they want more proof of the heirs of Daniel Brent because he bought the grave. And he's on the record I've seen the record sheet, the ledger at the cemetery, where his name purchased the grave. So it's a twofold approval. They need approval of the descendants of the person in the grave, and they need approval of the owner of the grave. So they wanted his descendants. Well, I had to tell them he doesn't have any, because his will left everything to his brother because his wife and his 2 children died very young, and he was single for years, and he left everything to his brother. So they assumed that the brother got it. It's a little convoluted. I believe he was reimbursed because he wrote to Secretary of State John Forsyth that he expected some reimbursement after he paid for it, but I couldn't find that. So they're just saying, okay, so now you have to find the heirs of Daniel Brent.
So are the French going to give money back to the Americans for, we were going to give that grave site back so they can resell it? So are they going to give us the money back when we pay?
Well, yeah, you think like I do, because they were going to dig her body up anyway.
Yeah.
And we're paying someone to do it. We're paying Anubis International, okay, to do the exhumation, and it ain't cheap. So you think they'd be like happy to do this, okay? And then they can still resell the plot.
Yeah.
But no, they won't. So just last week I got the requirement for more documentation for the Brent descendants. I think I have it. I think I can do it. But so the long answer to your question, but we're so close to approval. There's only 4 generations that I have to show some connections for. I've proved 3. They accepted those documents down from Daniel Brent. I've got 4 generations just to prove like a father-son tie and a father-daughter tie, in that chain of Brent's descendants. We had to hire finally a professional genealogist, had to help me for a while, because just one of Eliza's descendants, I looked through over 1,000 documents to find him, and then I was like, I just don't know what to do. So fortunately, the professional found him. He's been living in a foreign country. He's not even an American citizen. I mean, I never would have found him. He's in South America, for crying out loud. But anyway, we got him, and he approved and sent documents. That's it. Yes.
What has been your interaction with Hollywood Cemetery?
Oh, yes, that's been good. They agreed right away. Because before I even started the process, I thought I probably ought to make sure we can reinter her, before I bring her back. So the Monroe plot was just the appropriate place. So I got right in touch with them, and the director, Mr. Gillian, Mabel Tony, the assistant there, right away. I mean, he said, yeah, I think we can make that happen. The thing is, just a couple weeks ago, it was learned that the state of Virginia owns that plot. So now I needed permission from the state of Virginia to reinter her. So I met last week with 3 officials from the state, and they said absolutely, yes, we'll do this. They've got, to do some paperwork and stuff, but yeah, that's a done deal. So we've got all the permissions, everything's in place. Funeral Home in Paris is on standby. They said they can do the exhumation and return her within 2 weeks' notice. And Found in and Sons in Fredericksburg is ready to meet the plane. We've got a reception at Oakland's lined up. We're gonna drive by Oak Hill. We've got Sons of the American Revolution who are gonna do honor guards everywhere. So it's gonna be awesome. So we're ready to go. We just gotta get that approval for those last descendants of Daniel Brent, and then we're rolling. So we've got cards with our website and our Facebook page, and you know we've got a Facebook page and then also a web page. We try to keep that posted, so we'll be, if you want to keep up with like what's happening, that would be
How much funding from this point do you need?
This is a bare bones budget. I'd like it to be 50,000 because I'd like to do a lot of other things that are connected that I know.
I'm taking the mic from her.
I'm just telling you, I wish.
We can do this for 10. We just need 10 more. We can do this for 10 more.
Our budget at this point, bare bones, is 15,000. We're working on reducing that, and we're doing all right. But it's because of groups like you who refer us to DARs, to SARs, and to other patriotic groups that are supporting this, that it is within reach. So if you know a group, because this is really, it's not just bringing her home. It is also rehabilitating her reputation for this much maligned woman who doesn't deserve it. She deserves much more than a simple repatriation of the bones. We need to rewrite history here.
How short are you? You said you need 15 grand more.
Yes.
And that'll take up to what you need? You need 10?
We need about 11 at this point, 15. Yeah. But
This woman has wonderful grand plans, this big,
oh,
and I can tell, okay, so did bring.
this is a bare bones budget, okay? So we're looking for 15. We are.
The three things you need money for is the excavation.
Excavation.
They're going to do a budget on that, that's about $3,500. To bury her, we can dig the hole too, would be around $2,000 at Hollywood. And then we were hoping to have a reception after the interment at the Catholic Church. Oh, we need a
The
marker.
grave marker's gonna be a couple thousand, if it has to match this, and I agree with the state.
Okay, the marker?
The grave marker needs to match the one
Yeah.
of Elizabeth and the one of Mariah that's already in the presidential law.
And the reception will be in the one church
Hall of the cathedral.
of the Cathedral in Richmond. Now, the pastor there decided, or asked, if he could invite the whole parish. So we're thinking of 150 people, because we're also inviting the General Assembly. So we're not sure how many of them will show up, they might think this was no big deal. But, so that's a real slippery slope of how many people are gonna show up, and even how many people can get into this basement of the church, yeah. So those are basically the four things. The excavation, the burial, the reception, and the grave marker, yeah. Which will come to about, 10,000. Yeah. So, and it's a common thing in Europe. I mean, everybody just goes, ugh. But they, because the land is so short, it's common that they dig people up and resell it. Like here, you would just be like, whoa. I mean, you know, when they're in parking lots and find bones, it's like a major thing, you know? Where that's the way we treat people who have died. But over there, it's just like, you're out of here. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
So there's one more thing, and that is that we are under the umbrella of Historic Fredericksburg Foundation Incorporated, who are letting us use their 501c3 as a pass-through so that the donations are tax deductible. HFFI has a full plate because of Virginia 250 coming up, and they are not a resource for manpower. We are doing this on our own.
There you go.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Are your books for sale?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Any questions? Thank you so much.
group. I think you guys have done a wonderful job of repurposing this and of making it your own space. It is a wonderful asset to have in your community, and these people who sustain it should be thanked. I was very impressed. I also want to thank this lady and Deb Newton here for putting this together. It looks easy, for putting it together and making it work.
And Teresa.
And Teresa, there you go. Thank you. I know what it takes, and we appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you all for coming this evening, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Every time I hear the story, I get emotional each time again. And once I heard the story the first time, I just knew we had to help share the message and get the message out to everyone. So we're excited. Once again, I'd like to thank Marian Ashton. She is the director here at the A.T. Johnson Museum, and she is huge in this partnership. I am so proud to be working with her in this. This is my right-hand person. I can't do anything without Teresa. As you can see, with the computer. That's kind of where I am, and she comes along and fixes me, and I'm so happy about that. So, did you have a few words you'd like to say?
One thing.
Sure.
Thank you so much for coming to our little school by the side road. As you probably read, this was our first secondary public facility for the African descendant youth of Westmoreland County. But I am so excited to have been able to witness this presentation here tonight. As I tell everybody in this county that all of our histories sort of kind of overlap. And it's interesting because two African descendant men from this area actually purchased 84 acres of Eliza's grandfather's property in 1872. So we are connected historically. So this is the type of programming that we are partnering to unveil, because so many people want to separate the histories, whereas we feel that the histories are really embedded and they are closer together.
As they said, there are books over here that she's written, please. It's a fascinating story. She can only tap a little bit on tonight about all that she's done. The story is amazing. So you definitely, if you're interested, purchase a book. She'll be over there selling them.
Yes.
Yeah. And help yourself to dessert in the back or whatever, some snacks, some drinks, and dessert. There's cookies, there's cake, and so, yeah. So,
Let
thanks
me
again.
add, these packets have a lot more information in it. There are little business cards here with a QR code that will take you to our website. If you just want